sometimes mathematics get involved, and then that spooks people because there is no debate team with math, right? You can have a philosophy, you can have your own methodology, you can talk about physiology, but there's no debate with math. You can always find a way to get a bigger budget, but nothing beats using time effectively. I believe that there's a lot of good sports scientists out there. Let them do their job. Coaches need to be aware and use science, but there's also a compromise. If you're really good at technology and you're spending all your days in technologies, how are you going to learn to condition an athlete? Don't blame the staff. If the athlete is unable to train because they're competing so much, you got to have to find a creative way to make sure that they get into better shape by the time they start. And you're going to have to make sure that you're very narrow on that band to make sure that you can actually execute on training during the season.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. If you've been following my work, you know that the Moxy is a tool that I use a lot for testing, but also for everyday training and coaching. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms. Hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movement based on what the data shows you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, I can now target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their performance without adding unnecessary volume to their program. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch and can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmed VO2 systems. The Moxy is a product I've been using for many months with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE, UPSIDE, for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. Hey, Carl, we're live on the podcast. How you doing, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Like I said in the first recording try that we had just a few seconds ago before I had to kick all my children off the Wi-Fi, I've been reading I've been reading a lot of your articles over the year, and it's a pleasure to be able to exchange with you on the podcast today. So for, like I said before, the few listeners that don't know who you are yet, can you please give a quick bio of yourself?
Yeah, we won't spend too long on the bios. This is when people start fast forwarding or snoring. But simply put, I have a track and field background and some time in strength and conditioning. And over the last 10 years, I've been focusing on speed testing and a lot of technology. And currently right now, I do a lot of remote work with technology education and implementation, and do a little education on applied sciences, trying to help organizations make their user experience with sports science a little bit more practical and a little bit more engaging with the athlete. So that's probably a good channel to some questions on, what should we be doing with technology now?
Yeah, that's definitely a big point of interest of mine. About a year ago, I came across Evan Picon's work around the Moxy, and that kind of flipped my world upside down when it comes to understanding bioenergetics, and it has just led me to asking better questions. And so I'm interested in knowing, when did you start getting interested in technology as it applies to training?
Yeah, I think I got to give a shout out to Marty Hull, who is a inventor in the 90s. He created something called the Zoomer, Zoomer fins, and they were for swimming. And he created a really short fin, and then he started implementing some other technologies like an underwater camera. Mm-hmm. And so if you remember VHS, that was a time where it was really difficult to get video in a practical manner. We live now with iPhones and Android phones, and getting video so easy and ubiquitous that people don't understand the pain of simple video analysis. So he came up with an underwater camera called the Snooper Cam. And for me, that I realized as an athlete how powerful that was in terms of my own training. And then at the same time, James Cameron was doing stuff with there's a movie called The Abyss before he came up with Terminator, Terminator 1 and 2. During that time, he was interviewed and he said, look to technology to solve problems. And nothing really jived until right around 2008, 2009, where I felt there's an actual need for technology, because I assumed that everyone looked at technology the same way as a tool. But some people were spooked by it. Some people don't like the data because it's measuring. So there was a kind of like a war, a conflict where, technology is a shiny gadget. Well, or it's like numbers don't matter. It's about the human element. And it's like really polarizing. So I found it really disturbing, where part of me as an artist, because I do art, I do a lot of different art for myself. And I thought I was going to be a comic book artist. And then on the other side, there's the technology and engineering side that is so important. And it seems like art and science weren't really fused. And so that's why I've been really focusing on trying to merge the two.
You talked about people not liking the data because it measures. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Anytime you talk about how to evaluate something fairly and objectively, sometimes mathematics get involved, and then that spooks people because there is no debate team with math, right? You can have a philosophy, you can have your own methodology, you can talk about physiology, but there's no debate with math. And once you start distilling things to simple algebra, then people get really uncomfortable because they feel like technology is evaluating them as a coach rather than having a common dialogue or language. So for me, I'm not afraid of measurement. I think measurement creates context behind what we're doing. A lot of people, you can't measure that. Really? I mean, why are we so anti-science right now? It's like everyone's moving away from science as we start having a peek under the hood to our methodology. So for me, I love transparency. This stuff is hard and we need as much help as we can. So I love documentation. I love record keeping. But when people move away from that, I get suspicious that there's an underlying agenda. So yeah, it's hard right now in pro sports. People are like, right now, the leagues have dense playing schedules, blah, blah, blah. Nothing's really changed in pro sports, really. There's a little bit more quality of preparation. Athletes are bigger, faster, stronger. But the same challenges are still existing for the last 50 years. I mean, could you imagine pro baseball taking a train everywhere? So there's a lot of luxuries and benefits to what athletes are getting now. So I just look at technology as being disruptive. And right now, I think it's just part of our responsibility. You should know science. There's nothing wrong with science. Technology is an extension of that, and you need that too. The question is, are you being a bully with the science? Are you being a bully with the technology? And that's wrong too. The last thing you want to do is have people in their own little silos, because communication is a power struggle. I think we just need to be a little bit healthier with how we look at technology as just a way, as a tool to help us, right? It's just a tool, okay?
When you were saying being a bully with technology, could you give a couple practical examples of maybe ways that you sometimes see some coaches use it and apply it, or maybe abuse it, and maybe even just bring awareness to those areas so that people can reflect on it and say, hey, am I maybe doing that unknowingly, potentially, and that might be hurting my athletes or the team, etc.
Sure. I think when I say bully is that you should never let a budget of having a lot of hardware and software have that be kind of a gun to a person that might have good understanding and coaching, and saying, well, you don't have the data that I have. That's true. And there's something to be said for having experience and time and seeing all of these, when you have all of the cards out, it does make a difference. But logic and reasoning is just as important as technology. And a lot of times people, like there's a saying, the surgery was a success, but the patient died. You could have all the GPS systems, you can have all the force plates, all of that, but eventually you got to train someone. And the irony is the people that usually are such, look at force analysis for vertical jumping. the most overrated metric in sport. Not that how high you can jump, but looking at force analysis of a jump of a basketball player on a Tuesday morning that doesn't care. If NBA players are skipping the slam dunk contest for all the glory and honor of being like a super athlete in front of fans, do they really care on Tuesday morning after a long flight to jump with their hands on their hip without any motivation? No. So a lot of times people are collecting ornamental junk data to look like they're busy, but like if you're going to use force plates and you're only jumping in basketball, which is overuse syndromes like galore, are they really motivated to jump when their knees are banged up? Probably not. And if you're doing force plate work, show me the force, show me the barbells, right? Oh, we're looking at, eccentric ratios and all this stuff. That's fine. I love force analysis. I think it's great for the profession, but you need to have the equivocal intervention. Is your periodization and lifting just as impressive as the data that you're collecting? When I see people doing TRX lunges with 265-pound athletes and they're, worried about neuromuscular fatigue, you miss the boat. So sorry to get on that soapbox, but that's kind of an annoyance.
Don't be sorry. That's why you're here. It's funny you bring up the competition aspect. Do you think, in that regard, that, and I guess it's hard to generalize, but should most testing be done in a either fully competitive environment or even if we set it up as a competition, do you think we'll get better data out of the testing? You're talking about the jump testing, and like you said, if somebody doesn't care, they're not going to jump as high. I mean, I have a very simple example. One of my clients that I train twice a week, and we do some air bike sprints regularly just to see some peak power. And he brought a friend along, and he just happened to do 100 more watts than he ever did on there because there was a friend there, and he had to push a little bit harder.
Yeah, I do think that there's a embedded testing where people say, hey, just train and collect the data that's there. Well, that's important. There's nothing wrong with embedded testing, and I love doing that. I think that's probably the majority of the training. Just train like you weren't having technology spying on you. And if you have that liberty to do that, you're going to have a better user experience by the athlete. Athletes, you need as much data as necessary, not as much as possible. And sort of like training, do as much as you need to do, not just do training because you're worried that you're not doing enough. With testing, sometimes you want to have a combine experience to know, like, hey, we're going to push the limit. And that's really just try to get your absolute capacities. And you're going to get some great responses. The NFL combine, when that is their job, that's their Olympics, because that's a lot of careers at the stake. I think that's the time that you want to have absolute testing and submaximal testing before that. But also like to say, just sometimes it's good to kind of let the data be on the side so that you scan it, you glance at it, but you don't obsess about it. And then what that does is allows people to learn. Coaching is not just testing and training, it's also teaching. So those big 3 T's, you want to have a balance. And then why test if you don't think there's going to be an improvement or a decision from it? A lot of times these rhythms of testing, it's just arbitrary. It's like, I have this equipment, I want to get the most out of it. No, you don't want to get the most out of it. Use the cream of what the test can do and leave the ornamental stuff for, some of these workshops and conferences that we see with these bloated PowerPoints. Yes, it looks smart, but it's not effective. So like testing for vertical jumping. Let's say you're an athlete and you're 14 years old. If you test 10 times a year, not a huge amount, for the next 10 years, it's 100 tests. Right around number 30, are you going to be motivated? Take a look at the isometric mid-thigh pull. Everyone's looking at it and they obsess about it. I think it's a great test to get peak force. But then, I'm not going to mention the program, but, like I came in and it's like, hey, can you take a look? And I was like, none of your guys are giving good effort. And like, how do you know that? Well, this guy's got a separated shoulder. This guy's got a broken hand. And you're strapping him in with a hand that was broken for 8 weeks. And why is he motivated? You're not going to do anything in the programming because they all know that they have the same sets and rep schemes year after year. So you really have to give maybe 4-to-1 ratio back to the athlete to get really good engagement. So if an athlete gives you a piece of data, you need to give 4 pieces back so that they feel good about what they're doing. They feel like they're rewarded. They want to feel like they've been encouraged, and that you say thank you because they're helping you with your process. They don't have to do that, especially with the collective bargaining agreements. The other thing is to on education, no one wants to hear the science. They want to hear something that's relatable. They want to use the car analogy. Everyone uses it. Explain about horsepower and saying, hey, we're trying to get you to get more force. So let's segue to the isometric mid-thigh pull. I love isometric peak force because it shows that you've been training. Talent identification, this guy's talking about talent identification to a veteran roster. I was like, guys, you already have the players. These guys are in their 20s. You don't really need talent ID. You already have the combines for that. What you really need is a training identification. Are they in Mexico having a poolside drink, or are they training? And you can tease that out by looking what you've been doing for training. You can have a good jump profile from pickup basketball, but you're not going to have great peak force unless you're doing strength training. So I think that's what we need to spend more time on. And hopefully that wasn't, too sarcastic, but at least these are honest discussion points.
No, I think you're right. And I like the point you brought up about 1 for you, 4 for the athlete, and really just actually testing the things that you're going to use in your programming or to steer the individual programs of the athletes, or even just form, overall groups in your team if you have a team sport. But again, not just testing for the sake of testing. I work with an amateur rugby team here in Switzerland, and the only test that I do is a half Cooper because we have a track and because it takes 6 minutes. And based on that, I have a very general view of how fit they are, quote unquote. And then I make 3 groups, and those are my different running groups, different distances, different times. I could do sprint testing. I have my sprint. I have my jump. I could do all those things, but practically in the context that I'm in, I have 2 training sessions a week. The guys just need to play rugby. They need to spend time with the ball in hand. They just need to get a little bit fitter. And it doesn't make sense to just add more and more tests just because I can't do it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is like wellness questionnaires. Like they're technically free. I mean, you can subscribe to a small app, but like, what's the engagement with that? This one team, their head coach is notorious for becoming, he's like the butcher, right? They have a nickname, the butcher, because he does so much hard training. Everyone has to fake injuries to survive. And I said, what's the point of the sports scientist having a wellness questionnaire when it's like, my hamstring's bleeding, my Achilles feels like it's going to explode, and we got a hard day, not because we lost, but because we won and we want to get momentum, and we got to go train even harder and stuff like that. So they give the information back, and the sports scientist is like in the ear, literally next to the team coach. Athletes are just exhausted, sore, unhappy, mood, but they're doing the same workout. So what was the purpose of giving that information? Why am I going to go and take the little, even if it's 30 seconds to a minute, and give this information if it's not used? So one of the things that we did is the opposite. Make the wellness questionnaire embedded to services. So if you're sore, maybe you can schedule, like a massage. So you have a calendar connected to it. Simple tools, a calendar. I mean, I had to work with one organization, and they had all this artificial intelligence and machine learning, and no one used the calendar. So their scheduling was a nightmare for therapy sessions, for lifting. Said, just have a calendar. So an athlete, if you have some available time, can see you for maybe some treatment, or you can schedule when different services are there. So then they had a wellness questionnaire that was engaging, because it was like a decision-making tree to get services or access to things. So I think we have to be a little bit more creative and clever with being applied. I think the science is great, and I think the application is good, but there's this dead spot where people are like, okay, oh, we're doing applied sciences. Okay, well, I don't really see that because I see an attendance record that's spotty. Why are people not coming in to train? Well, you go there and it's sterile, right? You get into the gym and it's not a good user experience. Or they don't want to come in because of traffic, because you scheduled it at 9. Why not schedule an hour later? And so that, instead of going 50 minutes to get there, it takes 25. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that you have to do to encourage the user experience. And that's technology as well as, a little bit of creativity, outside the box thinking.
Like you said, those are not things that you would regularly think about off the bat, but like you said, it's quite creative. The simple fact of thinking, hey, the wellness questionnaire, it's about your recovery, it's about your potential to do hard things. But then, like you said, if we link that to a recovery calendar, it makes a lot of sense. Do you have other practical examples like this that you've applied in the last couple of years with the teams that you work with that have the potential to be implemented by pretty much anybody on any level, and that are simple yet quite effective in their own respective domains?
Yeah, I do think that there's something called the time pyramid. So in high school and college, you got to go to school. I won't say that for every team, but there's a way of looking at what's important. How many people talk about sleep? Everyone. But as soon as I ask, hey, can I see some, you're doing all this education, you're making infographics on what to drink and blacking out your room and then not looking at glowing devices. Yet when I ask to say, well, can you have some records of what they're sleeping like before, and then after your infographic and newsletter to your athletes, what happened then? Crickets, no response. First of all, I, like you, were probably an athlete too, and we know, hey, you want to go out and have fun, so you have to embrace that. And the guy that I really respect is Greg Popovich from the Spurs. He was one of the few people to say, let's not have a morning session. Let them sleep in and let them train at their biological rhythm. Now, you don't need to be a sports scientist to guess to say, hey, if you get in late, let the guys sleep, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the stuff that really concerns me is, like you say, okay, if you believe in sleep and nutrition and everything else is a shiny technology tool, great, but you still need technology to organize sleep, and you need to measure it. Otherwise, you're just guessing. Oh, my guys are sleeping. How do you know they're even in their rooms? So without spying on them, and there's a big difference between guardian angel, which is someone there to help you, and big brother. Big brother, nefarious reasons. Guardian angel is trying to help you. So it's the same thing. Someone's just technically overlooking you, but if you can provide them solutions to get better. So there's amnesty. If an athletes don't want to not sleep, they just don't want to give up the fun stuff that they're doing at night. So if you say we're going to have a morning session at 6, you need to prove to me that they're in bed by 9:30 and getting all the sleep. Otherwise, you're just waking up early with a sleep-deprived athlete that's just going to drink a Red Bull. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things we have to do is to say, what are our problems that are not exciting and sexy, and address the most impactful things. And it's usually lifestyle. So yes, I do think that people need to have good training programs, but it's not so much the recovery with sleep and nutrition. It's the whole package to make sure that their lifestyle is effective. So the best thing to do is to create timelines with athletes. Hey, it's prescribed just for you. So it's about them. It's athlete-centric versus coach-directed. And then you build up what the lifestyle they want, and they have to understand the trade-offs. Don't ask for this if you're not willing to sacrifice. So sacrifice, people are willing to train hard, but are they willing to give up alcohol, right? And if they're going to drink alcohol, maybe drink in the off season, get it out of your system, rock star mode for a little bit, and then get into monk mode. And then you just do damage control, because it's about beating the other guy, not so much of being a saint. Mm-hmm. So maybe you don't have to be completely, abstaining from alcohol, but if you drink less than the other teams, that might create an advantage. Also on sleep, maybe you have the alcohol, okay, and then maybe you go to sleep a little bit later so it's out of your system, right? Versus I'm going to drink and then pass out and wake up on my couch. So yeah, they're going to go out and maybe have a couple drinks, which is okay, but maybe make sure that your biorhythms and your timelines are lined up to your goals. So you can have your cake and eat it too. It just requires a little bit more organization, and that's a calendar. So I would say a calendar with a nice rhythm of activities is so much more potent than getting all of these gadgets, if you will, that are going to help with, supplementation. People get pill fatigue. Like, I believe in vitamin D supplementation, but if you don't do blood work, how do you know that they're actually taking the pill? People get sick of taking pills. So, but nutritionally, that might not be perfect if you're traveling. So these are very hard, challenging things. Now you can say, okay, Carl, where's the practical stuff? Let me get some rapid fire for you. One of the easiest thing to do is on your wellness questionnaires is ask those questions about sleep, right? And if they're getting great sleep, claiming, then you ask, okay, great. Do you mind having a bed object? So an object that's using, not accelerometry, but other sensors to dictate, is the person in bed? Okay, that's the first thing. Bed check. Are they in the bed? We don't know if they're looking at their phone and on TikTok, whatever, but they're in bed. You have a chance. Mm-hmm. When did they get out of bed? Okay, that's the first step. Then within that, are they actually active or not active? We don't have to get too many details of what you're doing in bed. That's privacy issues. But you have to consider they are a human being and they want to do these things. Okay, they want to be able to watch TV in bed maybe. And so you have to compromise. There's trade-offs. Maybe you watch TV on the couch and you give that up, and then you just go to bed for, rest and recreation. So then the next thing is that if you have that information, then you can move to the sensor, as I said earlier, and saying, hey, if you're 7.5 hours, let's see if we can get to 8. Maybe he needs 9 or she needs, 8.5. But if you can get another 30 minutes, that's worthwhile, because that might be enough to show up on the recovery side in terms of restoration of speed and power and alertness. So measuring sleep, to me, in a way that is non-invasive, you don't need to go Aura is great, but the rings themselves, what if you're lifting? A lot of people don't like to lift weights. They're taking them off. I like the Aura ring. It's good. But it's still not the same as really getting that information of the context of sleep. Okay, what did you do the hour before? So I think what we can do is move over from sleep, and we'll talk about nutrition. Nutrition is about feeding strategies, and then that needs to be scheduled. I rather see a nutritionist be a chef than someone that's going to educate in the office. And the reason is, where's the applied nutritionist, right? Strength and conditioning coaches are there while they're lifting, but you don't see nutritionists like, have another spoonful, you can do it. There's no coaching at the buffet line. Now, some nutritionists are unbelievable. They really change lives. So I'm not against the proactive ones, but look at what's popular. If you're not scheduling your meals and have them somehow organized like the military, then you can't control for the meals. And then also ask and profile the athlete. What do you like to eat? Where do you eat? You can see a lot on a GPS. Are they at Chipotle? Are they going there and going to get Starbucks 3 times a day because they're not sleeping? And they're not sleeping because they're getting to Starbucks 3 times a day. Yeah. So a lot of times that, and I'll wrap up is,
go ahead.
Can you get really behavioral type data in a way that's engaging through the apps? Because athletes will use their phone, and checking up on them. If you find some sort of way to reward them, they will give you the information if they see usefulness, benefit, and fun. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point on the nutrition side of things, my wife is a trained nutritionist, and she did the consulting for a while when she started and realized that writing plans is great, but nobody actually follows them. And she actually turned to meal prepping. So she would sit down with the person, establish a meal plan, go do the shopping, show up in their kitchen. She loves cooking, do the cooking, plan the meals, put them in their fridge. And next thing you know, people are actually eating the food. So it's quite a different service. But in the end, she saw tremendous results with that way of doing things, where just giving the program to the person doesn't give them the tools to apply it in everyday life. And like you said, behavior modification and change is at the core of all this. But again, it requires quite a bit of a detail-oriented approach where you can't just, like you said, throw an infographic on the wall and say, now this is how we do it. It's about, okay, every person has their different habits, different cycles, different ways of doing things throughout the day. So you need to get down to the individual level rather than just staying surface level with the big topics.
Yeah, I mean, meal prepping is huge, and then individualizing it. If everyone's getting a, Tupperware of like asparagus and some salmon, okay, that's nice and everything, but maybe everyone gets fish and people get their choice of veggies. I think when it comes down to it, when the athlete feels like it's a bottom-up approach, they're going to be 10 times more engaged. If everything's top down, they feel like horses at a stable where they have to eat the same amount of oats every day, right? They feel like they're not actually, it's dehumanizing in a way. And even horses, if they're what they're doing right now to make sure, because there's a huge crisis in horse racing with euthanizing these wonderful animals on the track, you have to think outside of what you're doing, because the problems that got you there aren't going to be using the same thinking. So, those are some things that are obvious, and it's not very tech heavy, but you can use technology, apps, programs to administer a program. That's more important. Not to say that hardware doesn't matter, but being organized, having good record keeping, having access to things, that is so much more important, because time you can't replace. You can always find a way to get a bigger budget, but nothing beats using time effectively. So, but now let's talk about overrated technologies and the questions that you had, because we can get into nutrition and lifestyle all day.
Exactly. So I wanted to jump to that. Exactly. So for you, with all your experience in the field, what has been the most impactful tech in sports in the last 10 years?
For me is video still. At the end of the day, I have probably, a small war chest of technologies that's actually better than a lot of countries in terms of their Olympic training centers, but it's not about how much you have, it's how useful it is. So the biggest problem I've seen over the last 10 years is the smartphone. Everyone thinks that their pictures of their salad or whatever is what we want to see. It's kind of strange. Would you have a Polaroid camera 30 years ago taking pictures of your food at a restaurant? So it's a weird perspective society where everyone thinks they're a photographer or a videographer, because it's ubiquitous, it's easy, it's unlimited. You don't have to worry about film. Now you have some storage issues, but that's not really a big burden because storage is cheap. So video to me is probably the most powerful way to really learn. Think about having a video camera surveillance, not in a locker room, but in a lounge area. Do these athletes talk to each other? Right? Maybe they don't have good chemistry. Are they acting a certain way? The coach walks in and you see everyone alert, or everyone just basically kind of roll their eyes and just look down. Nonverbal communication outside of training is just as important, So I think video is the cornerstone. You have so much information. It's like a liquid MRI to athletes. You get so much data. And also it's timeless. You can use it for other people. Next to that, I do think that sprint, jump, throw, and lift is important. So barbell tracking, not velocity-based training, but can you do the lifts properly? Are you squatting deep enough based upon your, arthrokinematics? Are you consistent? Are you following directions? Barbell tracking to me is not about how fast you can clean, because if you catch it, you're not cleaning at, 0.2 meters per second, right? There's a certain rhythm that you get on the Olympic lifts, and you fine tune it with the bar speed. But bar path, you get to tease out how you are lifting. And if you have a good sampling rate, you can get those little nuances to say, hey, is the bar close to you? So you're engaging the right muscle groups. Are you consistent? Are you fatiguing? Are you getting more activated? Because, we've seen where sometimes the bar path and the bar speed improves because there is a competitive nature, not because of the people around them, but they see their data from last year and they say, a year ago today, I was doing this load. I want more. I can't just be 2% better. I'm going to be 5% better because they learn from the feedback. Then on sprinting, sprint profiling, don't get me started. It is the most overrated concept ever. Now that's hyperbole. I mean, there's more overrated things, but people say, well, Carl, you always promote it. I do value the ability to profile someone's acceleration, the rate of acceleration, peak velocity, all of those characteristics, force, contact times, it's all great. But you need to have a wealth of ability to improve that. All these cats are talking about limb velocities and switching and all that other stuff. But when I see the videos on Instagram, I don't see that. I see raggedy hands that look like their arms look like Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm like, what happened to, all of this strike and rhythm and posture and stuff like that on the speed course that you talked about? And it's hard because sprinting is a very complex event. So I think we all have to be humble. I've been humbled right now. I just looked at some video and I saw very little change over 3 months. Now, I don't know if that's enough change to be worthwhile. I tried, but it's humbling because I look back and I had a much better coach, to tell me what to do. I mean, right now, the best sprint coach on the planet has to be Raina Ryder. And the amount of data that he's collecting, he's looking at not only stride parameters, but positions that are really complex because he's trying to extract every 100th and 10th out of an athlete. So I think with the sprinting side, the combination of really good video analysis, stride parameters, not your flying 10. Flying 10s are a good start. I wrote a how-to guide for conversions, but you're just kind of like timing a split. Like, let's not jump up and down here. The video or the kinematics need to match the speeds because how you run will allow you how to run better, right? Where's all these magicians that are doing all this magic before and after? Well, you can show a video of someone going and running pretty. I saw someone run 11.3 meters per second, and there's some issues with casting and some symmetry issues. And then this next video was gorgeous, but the guy was running at 10.2 meters per second, and it didn't transfer. He just ran pretty on the grass. So you need to have all of that information become one. And then on the jumping, horizontal jumping. Why is that like no one's talking about that, right? Everyone talks about a counter movement jump, maybe a reactive strength index. Great. I love that stuff. I believe in it. But what about horizontal, multi-directional? Plyometrics right now, they're not being coached well. So even if you have all that information, I say, hey, you're going to do some ricochet jumps. The coach knew everything about the force velocity profile of jumping. He knew about force analysis and impulse. But then when it came down to a solution to enhance the athlete, this coach didn't have the skill sets. I believe that there's a lot of good sports scientists out there. Let them do their job. Coaches need to be aware and use science, but there's also a compromise. If you're really good at technology and you're spending all your days in technologies, how are you going to learn to condition an athlete? What does it look like for a guy to bend over or a girl to, at a high school soccer practice to really be winded? What does that look like? So I think those skill sets of a coach, you really got to make sure, we talked about that ratio, for every ounce of science that you put in, you need to have probably about 10 ounces back in terms of coaching techniques and methodologies to apply that. So, so those are the things. The big four: lift, throw, jump, okay, and sprint. If you can do those four, obviously, like, throwing a medicine ball, doing a lift could be velocity based or Olympic lifts or whatever. You got to have some sort of training stimulus, and you got to be able to use it in an effective manner. Nordics, right? Everyone's doing Nordboard. But what's really interesting, there's one football program, not going to mention, really good strength coach at that time, had astronomical Nordic scores, right? Guys were kissing the ground like it's just repping out. And the first thing is, they're like, wow, you're doing your Nordics. And the guy was like, no, we're testing Nordics, but we didn't get Nordic strength from doing Nordics. That was like the most brain exploding ever to a lot of these sports scientists, that you can get good NordBord scores or good abilities to express torque at that knee joint and hip without doing Nordics. So I think that we need more coaching, more pop to get the science to do more for us. So sprint profiling, very overrated. And the reason is that if you're not able to use that information, I think the math and the innovation is great. Let's give some respect to the researchers from Spain, France, Ken Clark in the US that have done a really nice job of helping us get better. Yeah. But I blame the coaches, I blame the disciples of not using properly. So
yeah,
those are some
that
things. Now
we have the tech, and it's our fault if we don't use it the right way. I mean, it is a tool, and the tool can be used one way or another. You can use a hammer to bang a nail in, but now you're working on, I don't know, putting a flower bouquet together. It's not the right tool anymore.
Good example is the barbell tracking. Awesome tool. Are we seeing coaches that can teach the Olympic lifts better? Right? Are we seeing random high school, I'll throw it out there in Vermont, that everyone looks like they're a Chinese weightlifting hall, right? Where they're just polished snatches, some random sport, I'll just find crew. Not that you have to Olympic lift or snatch for crew, but some random athlete is snatching gorgeously, right? Or is everyone symmetrical and following a tempo prescription? Whether you believe in tempo or not, are they even following directions with the device? Are we seeing disciplined athletes in the weight room? Or do we see people not resting properly? I go, you go, when there needs to be 3 to 5 minutes rest. So when you audit things, are we doing the basics from 30 years ago? Probably not. We just become different, but not better. Evolution is when everything raises up, not when it basically becomes specialized in one area, but the results are not the same.
Yeah, and you beat me to it with the last one you mentioned, but let's talk about overrated tech.
Overrated tech. I believe in athlete tracking technology. So I do like foot pods and GPS. I said it. I think it's important. American football. It's literally, the field is a measured ruler. Plays are scripted down to the yard. So this one team had a receiver coach, and they did all the plays. And he goes, "Thank God for the GPS data." I said, "Well, did you look at it?" And this is during pre-COVID. This is during lunch, and he's like, "No." So what are you using it for? It's like, it's not like, oh wow, these guys are doing a lot of side work that we didn't know. And you look at the 2 hours, it was all prescribed routes, and because the intensity was high, because it's timing, it's high speed. It wasn't like they're doing small-sided American football, right? It wasn't like arena football indoors on Wednesdays, and then Canadian field on on Thursday, and then on the day before everything's going to be no one's lobbing. You don't see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going 3/4 speed throws, right? So there's no periodization. It's just like density and duration, right? Because football's full. So I think for football, I think the GPS stuff is overrated. I think for getting heat maps, it's interesting to see Kansas City versus Tampa Bay with the quarterbacks. That wasn't shocking. It was just illustrative. So I think with GPS, I think for American football, it's not as valuable as using video surveillance. I do think that you should use it because the lower levels in high school, I think you're not using GPS enough. So I think at the pro level, GPS is good to have. You should have it. Mandatory for all teams, unless you have a video tool, right? Like you're able to get the same data from cameras. Pro zone for soccer for years, but we're talking about there's other technologies. But on the youth side, there needs to be something there so people can understand the amount of work that the young kids are doing because it's hard for them to really understand that. So I think that's a problem. GPS or player tracking for pro basketball, they're not training like they were in practice years ago. They're doing a lot of shoot arounds. They're doing a lot of days off. So it's more of an entertainment league. And that's why they're having all these injuries, is because don't blame the staff. If the athlete is unable to train because they're competing so much, you got to have to find a creative way to make sure that they get into better shape by the time they start. And you're going to have to make sure that you're very narrow on that band to make sure that you can actually execute on training during the season. So I think GPS, it's underrated and overrated at the same time. I think athlete management systems have jumped the shark. I don't need to spend thousands of dollars for you to chart data. Like, I have enough problems. I don't need to see a line of my wellness questionnaire. Now, I do think that disrupting that requires automation, decision-making trees. Huge fan of products such as Fit. If this, then that is a very consumer-friendly product, right? You weigh yourself, it sends you a trigger, and then you make a decision in advance. I'm very pleased with what Ernie did on a presentation regarding that. Because if you know what the problem is going to be, have an intervention strategy and decision-making option and automate that. Don't create a speed bump with some sort of dashboard. Now, dashboards are great. I believe in them. But cut 90% of the visualization stuff out of it and start focusing on applied. Okay, this happens, then it filters this way based upon the thinking of the staff and coaches, where everyone's in agreement. Hey, if an athlete comes in here and he's asking to see the medical director, make sure that his priority is more than someone that just, you're just checking in with. Or if an athlete is really exhausted in the training, in the practice, that's a problem. Because I think that, like, if you're going to lift, do you need a readiness in the morning? You're always doing readiness every step of the way. So we got to have automation and some of that stuff be more useful for us. So we're not just slaves to looking at glowing rectangles. I see too many charts and, look at this bubble chart, the scatter plot. I'm like, great. Why don't we just, we know this is going to happen. Why don't we just set it up so that when it does it for us, so that we can, like, do the little things that matter. Okay. Yeah, so that's AMS. That needs to go away. It needs to be a little bit of management and a lot less, glory charts,
Yeah, I guess it's the problem with all new technologies, is that you have all the data, but there is no help with the decision making behind it. I mean, I run into this with the Moxie that I've been using for some months now. It's such a great piece of technology, but there is not yet the robust user experience on the back end to say, well, my SMO2 is at such and such level today. What do I do? When do I start my sprint? When do I stop? When am I done for the day? Given all those metrics.
Very, very good.
And so you have to kind of give the time to those technologies to hit maturity, I guess, before we can really use them and apply them.
But that's culture of the coaches. Like, I'm not going to, like, when I talk about heart rate variability, I never say that to an athlete, because in other coaches, you can drop off you can talk about SMO2 and SPO2, and you can talk about HRV and, EEG and all of the 3-letter acronyms. But I think the main thing is there a culture of supporting that? So, like, for example, Moxie, it's not invasive, but the irony is I don't use the Moxie monitor to monitor, right? That's daily, right? Monitoring is a daily process. It's a better name than calling the Moxie tester, right? But is it the Moxie profiler? Is it the Moxie integrator? Think about the VO2 master. I think you, do you have one?
I'm having one in a couple of weeks, and I just had Andrew and Peter on the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
Okay. So when you look at all of this, what are the constraints? What's holding you back? What's the limiter to performance if you're looking at aerobic output, right? So, there's a lot of calculations and algorithms that are non-invasive, but all those are crap. And the reason is you might not notice the sensitivity that you thought. Like, for example, when I do a yo-yo test or a 30-15, you can get great estimations, very good tool. But I said, I don't want to go and do lactate testing. Yay, not the prick blood. I don't want to do VO2 analysis or metabolic testing. Who cares about that? But then I felt like something was missing. Good example. Looked at the wellness questionnaire, again, willingness to train. We found that those that had the same, quote, metabolic output through the calculations, there was no difference in the math because it was an algorithm. It wasn't really a direct measure. Mm-hmm. So like breathing rate, some athletes just kind of get into this panic breathing at high intensity because their profile, they're not comfortable. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if they're not comfortable, maybe they find that pH changes to their blood is where they have fear. They've had a bad experience with conditioning. They're not confident. And if they're not confident, they don't see this as the lactate monster. Like lactate is a valuable byproduct. It's not, I won't get into the lecture to the person that knows a lot more on this than I do, but all of that little details, those things matter because when you're trying to get someone that doesn't want to do conditioning, they might be having the same readiness, but their willingness to train, maybe aerobically, they want to have those opiates and, that mindfulness of when you're having fatigue, you get close to depression. So I think what we're going to see in the next frontier is the brain, emotions, and all of these things to make the user experience. What makes an athlete tick, it is connected to physiology and biochemistry. Mm. And, why is an athlete moody? A lot of times an athlete is moody, not because they might have some sort of, we found an athlete that was screened for having an issue with, nasal cavity. They got a surgery. They thought because, he's an offensive lineman that he has some sort of obstruction, and he needs to have a CPAP machine. That wasn't true. What happened was he had some sort of issue with a broken nose, and then he got the
deviated septum or something like that. Yeah.
Something, I don't know what the exact detail. I know that he had the surgery and he felt comfortable. Now, it showed up on, the spirometry and all this stuff on the breathing patterns when he was breathing through his nose. When he was breathing through his mouth, it didn't matter too much on output. But what we saw at low intensity efforts, like vegetative riding, little stuff that he had to breathe through his mouth. And it wasn't a teachable issue. It was anatomically. Mm-hmm. So no matter how much you do the breathing training, it doesn't matter because his structure determined his function. Mm-hmm. He couldn't do that through his nose. He literally got a small percentage. There's a lot of athletes that have these problems, so I think, where we're going with this is that the Moxie is a good example. It's always iterating. Now it's Bluetooth. You can combine that with the VO2 Master app. Look at heart rate. Super underrated. Okay. People are like, we're running with power. The heart rate monitor is dead. Really? If I have a resting heart rate that's 38 and I'm standing, there's no way that I haven't done my homework unless there's some sort of weird physiological issue, like someone's on a medication or something strange that's abnormal. Mm. So basic numbers, improving the chambers, the heart size, all of that, those you can do a sonogram for. But if you have a resting heart rate that's really low consistently, then you're really resilient aerobically. Mm. And so when you're practicing on the end of the week, you're not on fumes. So a really cool thing we looked at is how to condition large athletes that are 150 kilos or larger. Mm-hmm. And there's a really good progressive sports scientist that did a lot of work with the bigger players with saunas for plasma volume, because you're not going to have them do like all this running because they're not really designed. They're like elephants. They're not designed to be antelopes, right? So he did all the plasma volume stuff, and then he did all the low impact stuff during the winter, and then they continued out throughout the season. So when it got cold again, out of the season, they're used to taking the saunas because there is some fatigue that you get. It's like a workout, but they became resilient to the saunas, but they maintained the plasma volume. And so the last quarter of the last part of the season, you can see it on the snaps. guys are walking up, confident, posture was up. The defensive players were gassed. Now that was obviously because of other things. Okay. So, those are some things to think about, is like, how are people finding that winning edge by finding those nuances? And that's what I'm all about, is really taking it. As soon as the other teams stop, that's when you need to begin on pushing the envelope. So, those are some great examples. Another good example is acidosis, where people, lactic acid's a myth. You're right. That's bad syntax and language, but you got to have the ability to go and produce high outputs and metabolic disturbances before you can start reducing the impact on that whole fatigue. A lot of people are not training hard anymore. So they're looking at and saying, well, we're going to let the games take care of itself. We're going to measure everything within practices. Yet they never do any workouts that really challenge the body, because everyone's trying to be specific, or because practices is the holy ground, because the team coach has so much power and the fitness coach isn't allowed to do anything. Well, then why are you there? If you're not doing anything external to the game, you're just collecting data. You might as well, get some interns. So anyway, that's just a rant on that. I think you probably want to wrap up with something practical, not so much negative.
Yeah, I was, and we kind of touched on that in the last few minutes. Again, you were ahead of me, but I like it. Maybe one tech of the future that you see coming that is not quite there yet. It's not, we still need a few years, maybe a decade or two in development, but it has the impact to change the way we do things in the way of coaching and training.
Ooh, let's see if I don't break any non-disclose. So there is a kinematic movement parameter and tracking tool. I think that there's a kind of like a local positioning unit that will be able to do 3D motion capture and get the really finite things like ground contact times, all of that with really good precision. It's such an information overload. Do people really want it? Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
We're not going to see the timing gates are going to be in trouble. We're going to see continuous velocities. You're going to see velocities in 3 dimensions, limb velocities. You're going to have all the data that you want. Great. Now what do you do? It's not computer vision. Computer vision's great, but you still need cameras. And the reason that computer vision is popular with pitching and hitting in tennis is because you can set it up easily. What are you going to do in a game? So computer vision is great for baseball and tennis, but like, what are you going to do in soccer, right? You're not going to have drones fly around. That's silly. But drones are going to grow too. So I think it's going to be, the markerless motion capture meets athlete tracking technology. The question is price, because as technology becomes cheaper, how do you make a revenue off of all the R&D that you need? So you might get a $300 IMU, but the calculations and the R&D development might cost millions. So that's going to be the subscription model of, hey, here's your toy, but then you're going to owe me for the rest of your life. Is sort of like, the shaking hands with the devil. So we got to be careful on that as well, because we're going to be all, subscription model based, software as a service type stuff down the road. So that's the future. The question is what we're able to do with it. We'll probably see in 10 years, people doing reverse curl cleans, squats that look like they're going to collapse, and plyos that look like they're going to snap. So doesn't matter without the coach. The coach is the most important part. And hopefully we have cutting edge coaches and better education rather than better tech.
Carl, that was a fantastic chat with you today. Where can people find out more about you?
Just go to Spikes Only at my Twitter handle. I usually announce new technologies, new tools, bringing back the newsletter so that people can see what's out there that's worth knowing. We're going to do a lot of stuff on the education side with my colleagues. I'm handpicking who I think are the best practitioners. And if they're not doing a lot of education, we'll probably have their information extracted, and we'll do master classes that way. Focusing on the education, tech is a big part of it, but I think we need to do a better job with it. versus trying to explore new tech. So I do R&D for sports tech, but I think the main thing is that we have to really do a better job at using what we have. Okay.
Thanks so much for your time today, Carl.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.